Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about everything under the sun related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I am Mo Berkner-Boyt. I'm the founder of the Moxie Exchange and Everyday Inclusion. I'm a white woman with red hair. I'm wearing red frames. I got my bookshelf behind me. And finally, I've got my fall sweater on because the weather changed, and it's time to relish the new season rather than think about how dark it's about to get. I'm really, really excited. Marcine Picron-Davis and I met at a conference, and I knew I wanted to have her on the series. So Marcine, please introduce yourself and let's dig in because I know you've got some brilliance to share.
Well, thank you, Mo. I appreciate the invitation. So happy to be with you and everyone else. I am Marcine Picron-Davis, and I currently serve as the Chief Diversity and Community Relations Officer at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. I joined PCOM in May 2017, so I'm in my 6th year. And the college actually has 3 locations. So the work that I do to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion and community outreach actually happens on all 3 campuses. And so my home campus is in Philadelphia, and we have 2 other campuses in Georgia, one in the metro Atlanta area, and the other campus is located in South Georgia. And we opened that particular campus in 2019 to attract and recruit students interested in rural medicine.
So welcome. And I'm just curious, we can talk offline about it too, but where in South Georgia?
Moultrie,
okay.
Georgia. So it's about an hour and a half from the Tallahassee airport.
Yeah. And if folks that don't know that, Moultrie is an area with lots of ag, like it is our very rural. So I love where those 3 campuses are, just from a thinking about medicine and who we serve. Those 3 campuses really, you're getting it all, I would assume, in terms of who your students are and who you serve. So how'd you get into the work? So you've been, and I'm thinking about, you started in 2017. So it's been a wild ride. Just knowing what's happened in the last 6 years, but how did you start doing DEIB work to begin with?
Kicking and screaming. So it actually happened at my previous institution where I spent 12 years there. And I was hired in 2003 to work at a small private traditional university. Right now I'm in academic medicine and professional graduate school, but this was a traditional institution of higher education. Was attracted to this particular role, which was new president, new role, which was really focused on connecting the community to the campus. So the work was really focused on community outreach, cultivating community partnerships, leveraging the college's resources, and building the capacity of that particular community. So it was really laser focused on community engagement. After being there and doing that work for about 6 years, I guess 6 years is the magic number, I was asked by the president, I reported to the president at the time. He was innovative at the time. This was 2006. So really, I guess it was maybe 3 years after I had been at the institution, approached me about taking the lead on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The college had a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan, but did not have anyone who was leading that particular part of the plan.
Yeah.
And so in his mind, he envisioned having the roles combined. During that time, though, I did not see where there was any alignment.
Interesting.
So I respectfully declined. A year later, when we were doing my review again, this time he said to me, I really need someone to take the lead on advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this time I'm not asking. So I had to really think about, well, how are these two, how are they in alignment? And it turns out after doing some research and finding my tribe, my community, the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed, they were very new. I think they were only a year old. So finding like-minded people, thought partners, really helped me to really rethink the work and to understand that the best practice is that the work is done both internally and externally.
Yeah.
So that's how I landed in that work. So I did that work for the institution until 2016. New president came, lots of transitions, a lot of restructuring, and ended up leaving that position and landing at where I am now at PCLM doing similar work.
You know what I think is interesting about the arc of your career? It really mirrors and matches the arc of DEIB, right? Where there was so much that was either ESG focused or community outreach, and then organizations maybe were starting to dabble internally, and often they had this little spark of an idea, and then actually we need, like any other strategic plan, somebody's got to execute and help us set strategy, moving forward. So I absolutely love that. And I love that you came to it with a no first. Because coming to it with a no first, Marcine, is really, you had to know, see, understand that there was true value, and that it was worthy and worthwhile and could actually be executed upon. So I love that, You didn't come like, yeah, sure, let's do it. You came as a skeptic.
I had to do some research. I had to understand, well, what does that mean? And I was very honest with him. I remember saying, that doesn't sound like a fun job at all. I remember saying, why would I do that? It doesn't sound like fun. And, when I made the case at that time, there's so much work to do in my current role, right? Let me do my current role with excellence. That's what I really wanted to do. But as I mentioned earlier, though, but seeing that there clearly is an alignment in the work, and how
they feed each other, How
it's really about equity and access. It's equity and access. That's really what I was able to discern when I began to think about what the role would look like. It's about equity and access.
I love that,
both internally and externally.
So where are you now? Where's the organization? And I mean, sort of where are you now in the journey, Like that, because if you came in 6 years ago, and we know health equity and inequity got laid bare during the pandemic, it's always been there, but it was quite literally people couldn't look away. And I'm curious what the evolution has been in this past 6 years.
So let me think about that. So you mean from when I started to where we are now?
Mm-hmm.
So a couple things have happened. There's a strategic plan. So when I arrived in a DEI strategic plan, let me make that concrete. So when I arrived in 2017, there was an overall institutional strategic plan, but there was no strategic plan that really focused on advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when I arrived in 2017, the college was on their 2020 plan. So one of the things that the president and I talked about was, once we began the planning of the next strategic plan, 2025, that it was imperative that we had diversity, equity, inclusion as part of essential in that plan. And so we do. So
when did the rural Georgia campus come on board?
2019.
Okay, so that was a part of the 2020 plan that they were executing. So that was already in the works. Okay.
So we were able to, at that time, to your point, to engage all three of our campuses in envisioning a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan.
Okay.
And so
go ahead.
So that's one of the things that's happened in the 6 years that I've been there. And the plan has been our roadmap for the last 4 years, because the plan ends in 2025. So, we're in the middle of the plan now. And it's been, as I said, it's been our North Star, and provided a way for different departments to see themselves as leading and advancing DEI. So, for example, more intentionality around recruiting underrepresented minority students, coming up with a definition of what does URIM mean. So really spearheaded some conversations about that. It also helped us to think more intentionally about curriculum. When we say we're preparing all of our graduates, so this is not just the medical school, it's also the physician assistants, pharmacy, physical therapy, clinical psychology. What does that look like? What does it mean when we say we're preparing all of our students to practice culturally responsive medicine? So it required us looking at our curriculum. What are those key learnings that we are able to point to that's preparing our students to be able to serve communities across cultural differences. It also provided us an opportunity to think about how do we provide professional development to our faculty, staff, and students outside the curriculum. What are some ways in which we can engage our faculty, staff in particular in these conversations around belonging? What does that mean? What is my role in making sure that we are a campus community that promotes respect and belonging? So those are some of the things that the strategic plan has allowed us to do, because, if you don't have a plan, you don't have buy-in.
And I think so I loved how you referred to it as the North Star, because there can be a lot of noise, right? We could do this, or we could do this, or we could do this. But if you're using that North Star, and then I love the different ways that plan allowed you to focus, right? Everything from who are our students going to be, to what are we teaching them, to how are we teaching them, and how are we, those people that are teaching them, how are we developing them continually as well? And I think thinking about those, just for me listening to you, like thinking about those in the buckets, right? That's a 360 approach.
And as well as recruiting our hiring, what are our hiring practices? How do we ensure that we're hiring the best, the brightest, and people who are attracted to advancing our mission? So, looking at our recruitment strategies, how broad is our pool? Where are we recruiting from? Are we intentional about recruiting faculty and staff who look like our students? So that's another area in which the plan has really helped us to develop some focus, a laser focus.
I love it. And when do you start, Marcine, then when do you start the planning process for 2030?
Next year.
Okay.
So the best practice now are 3-year plans.
Okay, great.
Right. So this will be a 3-year plan.
I think that's, it's so hard to look beyond that. The world shifts and changes so much. And in that process, in the planning process itself, who all do you engage?
So it's a campus-wide. For us, it's the stakeholders, it's the trustees, it's alums, it includes current students, faculty, staff, and then key stakeholders, external stakeholders. So with the plan that we developed around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we actually hired outside consultants to come in and help us craft the plan, help us identify a DEI strategic planning committee, but also help us think about, who are the key people that we need to be involved in terms of, focus groups and getting the important voices in the room to think about what the plan should be.
I think there's so much of this work that is about stakeholder engagement and influence. And so what Marcine just shared, y'all, is even starting with the planning process, how you get all of those folks engaged and involved, which creates ownership.
And inclusion. It illustrates inclusion.
Yeah, right. Well, you're not just modeling it, right? You're doing it. You're not saying that. And I would say there's equity in there as well, in terms of, right, whose voice is heard. So what do you see as next? And or even what would you say are some of, before we talk about that, what would you say have been some of the wins?
So the ones have been, we've been, even before this whole SCOTUS thing came down, we have already been in our strategic plan. One of our action steps is around broadening articulation and affiliation agreements with Hispanic serving institutions, as well as historically Black colleges and universities. That was already in our plan.
Mhm.
And so we're continuing to do that. And so I believe at this point in time, since we launched the plan in 2020 till now, 2023, I believe there are at least 9 new affiliations and agreements
That's great.
with those institutions, those minority serving institutions. And so I think that's an example of a win. I'll give an example. So with Morgan, we have an affiliation with Morgan's biomed program.
Mm.
Not only are we able to recruit students to PCOM, there's a mentoring initiative in place to make sure that those students are set up for success.
Awesome.
So we pair them with mentors, as an example. I think another example is when I arrived in 2017, there were no lectures focused specifically on diversity in medicine. And so I have, there's about maybe 8 to 10 courses now that my office coordinates that's devoted to exposing students to diversity in medicine, specific topics related to that.
Awesome. Yeah.
So
if you had to share, I mean, certainly, Marcine, I would just say from a best practice standpoint, the way that you go about the strategic plan, execution, engagement of stakeholders, right? That to me is just a best practice, right? In those 3-year, and truly using it as the North Star. Would you say that there are any other, I'm sure there are, any other best practices that you want to share in terms of anything around doing this work?
yeah, I think that I was definitely, if there are funding to hire an outside consultant, using data from the campus climate survey, most institutions have that as part of their plan. It's using that data to help inform and shape the plan.
Absolutely.
Making sure that it's an inclusive planning process, that you're getting as many people in the room, and then what they call a give back. So not only are you collecting data, but giving back what you heard as you begin crafting the plan. So the plan is always a work in progress. It's always, pretty much evergreen.
Well, and I think I'd love that in terms of if you're asking people for input, sharing back, I think sometimes that step gets missed.
And we made sure we did that. The consultants that I worked with made sure that we did give backs on all 3 campuses.
Yeah, that's great. We always say, like, don't ask a question if you don't want to know the answer, if you're not going to do anything about it, and if you're not going to share what you're doing about it and connect those dots back. So what's next? As you're forward facing, what do you see in the next, well, let's just say between now and the end of 2024?
So what I would like to see is, in keeping with the conversation about best practices, the best practice is for each unit, each program to come up with their own DEIB plan. So, and then I serve much more as a consultant, so for example, having the physician assistants program, work with them on crafting their own DEI plan, and making it much more granular. What is your plan for recruiting diverse faculty? What is your plan for recruiting diverse students? What is your plan for making sure that your curriculum is preparing students to practice culturally responsive medicine? So that is what my plan will be once we sunset the current DEI plan.
When you, I want to dig in just a little bit, because I think in many organizations, people sitting in your role do act as internal consultants. Practically, what does that look like? Does that mean that you are visiting campuses? Does that mean that you have a cadence of meetings and planning sessions? Like, what's the nuts and bolts of that?
Well, it's about accountability. So, my work would really be around functioning as you just described, an internal consultant, making sure that people are meeting their metrics and just checking in, where are you?
Mhm.
We have someone at the college, senior level administrator, who is responsible for making sure that the plan is updated regularly. And when
Mm,
I say regularly, I think we get emails from her quarterly about, where's the data for your particular part of the plan. And
yeah.
that's everyone. So you have somebody who is what you call the lead, and then you have somebody who's a collaborator. So we're responsible for making sure that we collect the data and that we are moving forward with the action steps in the plan.
What's your hope? What's your hope for the future?
Work myself out of a job. That's
All
what we all
right.
talk about as diversity officers.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
people will just wake up and just do the work.
Right. And it's so ingrained in everybody that there doesn't have to be a, yeah.
I was at a conference on Monday here in Philadelphia, and one of the workshop facilitators said something that I agree with. He said, it's not about changing hearts and minds, it's changing behaviors.
Absolutely. This is all behavior change, right? That's, I mean, we built the entire app around the neuroscience of behavior change.
Mhm.
Because most people want to do the right thing, right? They don't have the resources, the tools, the knowledge, and so that is about, and it's about consistency of behavior.
Mhm. Mhm.
We talk about it, and I think it would be interesting in medicine, because we find the same is true in manufacturing or any organization that is very safety, has a safety culture.
Mhm.
Having a safety culture is very similar to having an inclusive culture, right? In the safety culture, you're measuring, you're paying attention. It is things that people are putting on their steel toe boots, or in medicine, right? I'm putting on my gloves, I'm putting on my mask, I'm putting on all that PPE. And I don't choose to do that some days and not, or with some patients and not other patients. I do it consistently, right? Because that's about patient safety and about provider safety. Inclusive culture is the same thing, right? It's
Mhm. Mhm.
all the time a set of behaviors. So um, I would love for you to leave me with one last truth bomb.
One of the I think that what influences chief diversity officers who are engaged in academic medicine, whether it's allopathic or osteopathic, I think at the end of the day, we aspire or we aim to mitigate health inequities. That's really what the work is about. These different attacks that's happening on DEI, at the end of the day, it really is around, the commitment to making sure that people have access to quality healthcare. And the way to do that is through recruiting, creating diverse pathways to mitigate health disparities, making sure that students are educated and are informed and are exposed so that they can practice culturally responsive medicine. So I think that's why we are in these roles, is to ensure that we have people from all communities that are healthy and have access to quality healthcare.
Right. Basic human right.
Absolutely.
Marcine, thank you. Thank you for sharing your brilliance, and your best practices and practical things that we all can do doing this work. This series really is about all of us learning from each other. And you just added to that body of knowledge, and I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mo. Appreciate you.
All right, y'all. We will see you next time on Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Get out there and do the next right thing.